Alright, so in this video I'm going to explain the concepts of clear and float as it pertains to CSS styling and positioning. Alright, so first off, before we begin, let's make sure we have an understanding of how this document is structured. So in the body, I have a div, which acts as a container, and that div or container stores 3 divs, and they each have 3 paragraphs with some ipsum lorem text in them. Sorry, lorem ipsum text. And then each one is assigned to a different CSS class. So div 1, div 2, and div 3. Okay, so by default, divs are going to be block level. So I'm going to remove these floats so you can see what the defaults would be. So you can see that they just stack. So they each take up like a full block as opposed to like a defined span or width of the page. But you can fiddle around with that and actually change how these things are displayed from the default. So let's start off with some declarations of some float options. So float basically specifies how an element should float relative to its container. So remember that div 1, div 2, and div 3 are all within a single div. So to change the defaults, I'm going to set for div 1, we're going to do float, and we're going to have it float to the left. Get rid of some of the space here. And save that. So now you can see it popped up there, and now this, or you can see that it floated left, and now the second div has moved up beside of it. If we can expand this out, we will see that that bottom div still is on a new line, so it's honoring its defaults. So let's see if we can get it to move up to the top also. So for the second div, we'll have a float left. And then the last div here will also float left. And something didn't work. Oh, that's why I put a colon instead of that. There we go. There we go. Okay, so if we have enough width for every element, now they're all floating to the left of their container, the main div. And they're side by side, and they don't split into new lines until you run out of room for the specified width. Okay, so now what I'm going to do for this second div is I'm going to do a clear. So I'm going to change this to clear, and we want to do a clear both. So what this means is elements will not be able to float to the left or to the right of it. Well, let's see what that does. There we go. So now they're back to being on separate lines because clear effectively undoes the float. So when you set a clear value to both in this case, that means it's not going to allow anything to float to the left or to the right of the object. Since really we just had everything move to the left, if we did clear left, it would do the exact same thing in this case. So again, nothing can float to the left of it. Alright, so I'm going to set this to right and see what that does. And let's get rid of this clear. Alright, so this behavior is happening because we don't have a float set for the middle one. So we do float there, and we'll do left again. So here's the container, and then we make it large enough, these two float to the left, and that one floats to the right. So in summary, with float, you basically have a couple options. So for an element, you can have left or right, which means it'll float to the left or right of its container. So in this current example, these two are set to float left, so they float to the left of the div in which they're contained. So real quick, if we look at the developer tools here, expand this out a bit. We'll do a inspect. So this is that main div, body, div. So that's the main div. And then we've got the 3 subdivs inside of it. And you can see the float options over here. The default is for float to be set to none. So so there won't be floats. And then again, since these are block level divs, then they're going to move down to a new line. And then another option is inherit, which means it inherits the float value of its parent. And then clear kind of again undoes float. So if clear is set to none, that means that elements can float to either side of it. If it's left, then things can't float to the left. If it's right, then things can't float to the right. And if it's both, then things can't float to the left or the right. And then it inherits the clear value of its parent.